for most people, like most people I talk to here in Canada, well, let me not use most, but sorry, forgive me. You get the sense that we all want to move to the other side of the border. Like we want to move to the States. For Sindhu, who writes This Immigrant Life, she went the reverse. So she moved to the States, then moved to Canada. And for me, like that was like, why did you do that? Because for me, like everyone, like, you want to go to the States. This seems is more jobs. This, it's a much bigger country, it's more economic prosperity, all those things. But I'll let you listen to her story. But I think one big thing that she said, which I can't stop thinking about, was about how Canada feels a bit more like Canada wants you to stay here. Canada is much more welcoming than the States, which is a bit of an irony to me, because I've also heard immigrant consultants talk about the fact that the US system seems to be a bit more human, in the sense that this US system has human interaction, so it's much better. But then she also explains why, like, if the incentives are wrong, the system wouldn't exactly work properly. But yeah, let's listen to her story, because she also shares, if you're thinking of moving to Canada, she also shares people you should follow to get the right information, because there's a ton of wrong information out there right now. Enjoy. You lived in the States and then Canada. I think for me is because, you hear people a lot saying, oh, I want to go move to the United States. Maybe not that much right now, considering all that's going on. But people say, I want to move to the United States. But you moved to the States and then moved to Canada. So I just want to talk a bit about that journey and the motivations, like what kind of drove that kind of choice. Yeah.
I get this question a lot, Dawes, as you can imagine, because a lot of people here in Canada want to move to the US for obvious reasons, right? Economic opportunities, salary, all of that stuff. So my decision was unique to the fact that the way Indians are treated in the US immigration system is unique. And when I say Indians, I mean people born in India. So just a little bit of understanding. The way you are treated in the US immigration system depends on the country of your birth. So the way it is that all permanent residencies are kind of chopped up based on your country of birth. It's supposed to be to preserve diversity. And no country of birth can receive any more than 7% of the total number of permanent residencies allocated for that year. Now, if you're from a relatively small country, that's not too much of a problem because there's not a lot of people applying from that country. But if you're from a country like India or China or Mexico that sends a lot of people, that's a real big problem. And specifically for India, we tend to face the worst of that in the skilled immigrant category. And the backlogs for permanent residency are huge, such that in the most common category, the wait times have now exceeded the like human lifespans, like the productive population, productive human lifespan. Depending on what source you believe, it's 50 years, 30 years, 70 years, that kind of thing. So it takes a lot of legwork extra above and beyond the normal person, the normal applicant to get to permanent residency. And that's a level of uncertainty that I was not willing to deal with because I'd already gone through a lot in the US immigration system. And for me, I really want to feel a sense of belonging where I live. I want to contribute to the place that I live at. I want to become a part of the body, of the society.
Yeah.
I want to understand the place. I want to understand its history. I want to understand its people. And it's very hard to do when you are constantly living at this existential level of, will I get kicked out if I lose my job? Like, I can't take a break if I'm burnt out. I can't take a break if I'm unwell. When you're operating at that superficial level of existence, that's very hard to do. So that was the thing that spurred my decision to move to Canada. And I have never looked back. I am never re-adjudicating this decision.
Gosh. Yeah, it's and just building on that, because what I see there is that already as an immigrant, you struggle with the feeling of being the other person, and you kind of have to work extremely hard to, to overcome that feeling, both from a mental, physical point of view.
Yeah.
And I can imagine that when you combine that with a system designed in that way, then it's just, you never kind of get over that feeling. I kind of sense that.
Oh, absolutely. Because when you're on a visa, and when I say I will never re-adjudicate that decision, what I mean is that I will never, ever not prioritize having that sense of belonging. That's kind
Yeah.
of what I mean by that. Not that I will never not want to live in Canada. What I mean is I will always prioritize having that sense of belonging, having that feeling of groundedness, not feeling othered is very important to me for exactly this reason, right? So there's so much terminology around this. So in the US, when I was there, you're called a non-resident alien. That's the legal terminology on the books, a non-resident alien, right? And it's not just terminology. When you enter the border, it's a very adversarial conversation that you have. When you file paperwork with the immigration agency, it's a very adversarial experience that you have. And when I was there, for 3 years, I could not work. I lost my work authorization. And that was a very hard one career as it is. I work in the life sciences. So this is not an industry that's famous for, needing immigrants or accepting immigrants or being very generous in sponsorship. So it was a very hard one career and it was very difficult to take that step back and not work. And it really did make me wonder that if the immigration agency's job is not to facilitate immigrants and kind of, integrate them in that way, what is its job? You know? Uh, so all of these questions started to build up, and that is when I decided that I had had enough. That was that was enough for me. Yeah.
You raised something very interesting. I've heard people say, or I've had people on the pod come talk to me about the fact that the difference between the Canadian immigration system and the American immigration system, and not in a good or bad way, it's just the idea that how in the U.S. immigration system, you meet a human being. In Canada, you probably don't meet a human being until you get your citizenship, or sometimes you probably don't meet a human being at all till you meet the CBSA, and which is not really an immigrant official. That's a border official. And the person's argument was that maybe we should have more human-to-human contact with the Canadian system. It may probably make us a bit more human. But I'm hearing you say this to me, and I'm just thinking about maybe humanity is really in how you design the system, whether you put a human there or not. Because even if you put a human there and it's still designed as very adversarial, then literally means that the human-to-human interaction is not something you look forward to, because every single time you go there with your heart beating faster than your mouth can close and open at the same time.
You have hit the nail on the head because I will tell you. So, as a student visa applicant, which is how I first came to the US, if I go to the US consulate and apply for a visa and I'm rejected, even if it is completely baseless, decisions made at a US consulate, like visa decisions, are not reviewable by US courts. That is the immigration system in the US. They have sort of discretion at the consular level and they are not reviewable. Now, I can't imagine that doesn't impact the behavior of consular authorities, that they essentially have a trump card to make whatever decisions. And these are inherently subjective decisions, right? You don't really know that the person standing in front of you is going to go back after their education or after their work, or they are going to, stay on or whatever that's going to be, because you're essentially predicting the future.
Yeah.
Sometimes, I mean, I didn't even know when I was studying whether I would want to stay back, right? So those decisions are not reviewable. In Canada, that's not the case. If the consular official or the immigration system makes an incorrect decision at the consular level,
Yeah.
those decisions are reviewable by the courts. So the interaction that you have with a human being depends on the incentives built into the system.
Oh, yeah.
right? So if you're given so much power and discretion that you're able to make essentially a decision that is not able to be scrutinized in any meaningful way, that system is going to be more hostile
Yeah.
or less able to be accommodative of an
Mm.
immigrant, right? So really, it's the system that defines the way the interactions are going
Yeah.
to happen.
Yeah. You're right. You're so right. The incentive, like no matter whether human or no human, the incentives define how the system shows up. Like, and yeah, because I mean, you just reminded me of how, yeah, it used to be back in Nigeria. You went to the US embassy, like they just took, if sometimes some people just feel like they took a look at you and like, no, like just no visa. And like you
Yeah.
said, it's done. Like you probably have to come back and apply again, or you try and but it was just like very almost like a axe coming down to cut a tree, and then the tree can
Yeah.
never go back again. That sort of thing.
Now that I think about it, there are early in a relationship, you know how sometimes people ask you to look for the red flags. I'll tell you, my experience of getting my student visa stamped the very first time, this is my very first experience going to an American consulate. This was in Mumbai. Mumbai is known for its torrential rains. These are such heavy rains that you literally cannot see your hand in front of your face, right? It's very heavy rains. And we were standing outside the US consulate. I had one of the first few appointments of the day, and it was just deluge, right? And so I had an umbrella, and I had my backpack which had all my documents, like super important documents. So I had the backpack in front of me instead of behind me, and I was clutching it because it's okay if I get wet but my documents cannot get wet, right? So I had the umbrella in front of me. And in the US consulate, they don't let you enter till your appointment is, you're ready for your appointment. And there's no shade outside, there's no seating outside, there's no facilities outside, there's no restrooms outside, there's just no provision for you. And this is true in Canada, this is true in Mumbai, this is true, I've heard everywhere. Right, there's just no provision for you. And once I went in, the person at the door told me I can't bring my umbrella, so I had to give away my umbrella to my parents. And just the whole experience was not good. I still remember giving my interview with my pants wet, up to my knees. And it just, there's a certain lack of consideration there, I feel. And I'm sure this is not only true of American consulates, I'm sure it is true of other consulates. But just the way you greet people coming in for a visa, there's this imbalance, right? That, oh, you're here for a visa, right? Is it really so difficult to put a shed outside to prevent people from being cold or wet or, whatever? And now I feel like I didn't think about it that much. I was also young. But now when I look at it, I feel like that should have been a bit of a flag that,
Yeah.
this is how you treat your incoming international students. What does that say about your system? You
Yeah.
know, I think about that now. I really do.
Ah.
And I recently heard that somebody went to Ottawa to get a visa stamp, and it was extremely cold. Ottawa obviously gets very cold. You've lived there. And it was minus something or other. It was extremely cold, and they wouldn't let people in. And sometimes the lines get very long, and people just stand there. It's crazy. Yeah, it's just wild.
It's that thing about treating people like human beings or treating people like animals.
Yeah. And it just feels like, oh, there's that need, right? And I've often noticed in my conversations with people who just are not used to getting visas, their reality, it's not their fault, but their reality has been they can just jump on a flight and go wherever they need
Yeah.
to. That they have no concept of visas. And I've taken this opportunity. I've been outspoken for a while now. And I tell them, that that's just not everybody's reality. Not everybody can just jump on a flight and go wherever. Some of us have to actually prove why we need to go there. Will we come back? Will we not take a job? Will we, kind of hide under some rock over there? Like it's really degrading.
Yeah, the truth is that the border process is one of the most degrading things you can go through if you hold certain kind of passports. Like it really makes you question. You question a ton of things. Like you question why you were born in a certain country. I know as a young kid, I used always to question why I was born in Nigeria sometimes, because you just couldn't make sense of why you got some kind of treatment from people at a border, or some of the questions your parents got, and you in your innocence as a kid, you still just felt like this doesn't make sense at all. Like it doesn't make sense to ask me all those questions. Like what? I guess keep talking
I'm
about
very
it.
conflicted about that, because on the one hand, I do understand that the reality is that there is a lot of incentive for somebody to migrate to a high earning country, whether irregularly or regularly, and they may not come back after the expiry of their status because their circumstances might be that they can't. So the receiving country does have to make sure that they are protecting, their resources, their situations. Yes, there has to be some common sense protections. And obviously, it's much less likely that somebody from the US will just, in an unauthorized way, immigrate to, say, Nigeria or India or, Russia or wherever else. So, okay, they get more travel privileges. What's less easy to understand or just emotionally accept is that there are people in the world that have no concept of these barriers. That is the thing that's harder to understand and sometimes face. The reality of it, okay, it's not great, but it exists for a reason. I wish that were not the case. I wish things get more equal, and fighting for it and advocating for it is part of every immigrant's, especially those of us who have been fortunate enough to uh, come onto this side and represent our cultures. We are able to do and should do. But it's the fact that some people have not had that experience, have not had that education. I think we have a responsibility in that area. We really do.
It's let's move on to more the things that are a little bit less depressing, because that topic always gets me.
I hear you. It's serious.
It gets me very icky in a way. It's icky actually in many ways. There's morality there. There's, like, you're right. Like there's a reason to. The question is that could it be much, much better?
Could it be much better? Yes. Is there a better regime by which the same goals can be reached?
Yeah, because I've been exploring this thing about, I read it somewhere about what the emotion cruelty means. So someone was saying that cruelty is really just joy and anger put together. What it does is it says that it justifies, I'm not probably explaining it properly, but it justifies that I am doing this good thing. For me to do this good thing, I have to do this bad thing. Like that's what the guy was saying, that's what the emotion cruelty always means. And that it's a popular language with politicians. Politicians use the cruelty language in the sense that I'm doing this for you, because when I do this for you, it allows me to do that good thing. I have to do this bad thing. And I feel like we've allowed that go on for so long in the world that it has now even become the way we frame conversations is to do this, then that has to happen. And I am not utopian enough to believe that the world is going to be some place where it's all kumbaya. But maybe I'm utopian enough to kind of hope that there's probably a much, much better way.
Yes.
The world is not exactly black and white. It's not
yes
or no. There's nuance.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
Yes. So I think that's for me, like that's where I am. It's just a thought I'm exploring my head out. Oh yeah.
But I really believe in the power of systems. And this might have something to do with the fact that in my day job, I do build a lot of systems and I believe in the power of their ability to do things well. It's just the nitty-gritty of how things work have a lot of power to them to do good and to do things not well. And those details really matter. They're boring sometimes, but they really matter. They really matter. And even when things happen well, I remember I was so conditioned both by my Indian upbringing of having a very adversarial border with Pakistan, with China, with every place, that I don't consider borders a fun place. I just don't. That's just not my headspace, right? So when I drove into from the US to Canada, right, I was really prepared for like adversarial interaction. That's just my natural conditioning around borders. But and this was during just in the immediate aftermath of COVID, so late 2021. So I had my trusty folder with all the documents lined up and everything, and I come to the Canadian border, and the CBSA official is like, "Hello," there's very lightness in her voice, So I gave her my landing documents. I arrived in Canada as a permanent resident, just like you. So I gave her my landing documents. I gave her my vaccination. I gave her all of that stuff. And then she said, "Oh, okay, you're all good. Go to that, landing post and you'll answer some questions." And then I let out a sigh, like, and she must have heard that. So it must have been loud. So she said, "Why are you so stressed? You're so well prepared. You're fine. It's going to be completely all right." And, I didn't know how to react to that. I had no idea what to do with it. I was like, why? She's being so nice. I mean, a border official being that nice, I didn't know what to do with that. So I was like, "Oh, thank you." And I just took everything back and I just hightailed it to the building. And
Before she changes her mind, right?
yeah, before she changed her mind, exactly. But it was very, very affirming to have a border official be nice, just
Yeah,
human, you know.
yeah.
And then I went in there and I met a gruff guy, and I was like, "Yeah, this I'm used to. That I'm not used to." It is just funny. It's just basic human
Yeah,
considerations. That's it.
yeah.
It is a very positive experience, I have to say.
That's good to
Very
hear. I mean,
positive.
that's good to hear.
Yeah,
Now that
it's
we're
not
talking
been
about
the
Canada.
Yeah, now we're talking about Canada. And it hasn't been the only one. I remember the first time I came back from India. This was my first trip leaving Canada after establishing permanent residence. And I came back and I shared this story in my CBC article that I published. Um, and I was coming down the escalator, going towards customs and immigration clearance. And suddenly, this voice in my head asks, will they ask me where I work? Will they ask me why I'm here? Again, this borders just evokes a lack of safety
Yeah,
in me. It's just so deep. And then we move towards those lines, and they branch out, right, to non-citizens and non-permanent residents and then permanent residents. And on the non-permanent resident side is this window where people are being asked questions and all that. And on the permanent residents and citizen side, this guy is standing with his legs crossed. Like, it's a very loose body language, right? He's very chill. And he didn't even look at my passport. He just looked at my PR card and said, "Welcome home." I could have hugged the guy. I swear. I mean, of course, I would have, I would have gotten arrested right away. So I didn't do that. But it was just so nice to hear those words, like "welcome home." And people, I've been told by somebody that ultimately immigration is just paperwork. You shouldn't let it define you and all that. I think it sounds good for the movies,
nah,
but
yeah, yeah,
it makes a huge difference what that scrap of paper says. It's the foundation
yeah,
for what you build in a foreign country. It's
yeah.
absolutely foundational.
Whenever I hear someone say that, I'm like, you don't understand immigration. You don't. You don't understand because there are a ton of things that happen to you that can't. It's probably going to take a full day to talk about it if we want to talk about it, and how it affects you, changes your mood, affects how you do things. Affects how you approach stuff. it can be, I don't know, just what's, yeah, let me, building on your Canada conversation, tell me a bit about now. So now, with all you experienced in the States, like, how was it settling into Canada? And I know you wrote about this in your piece about creating your own unique flavor of Canadianness. Like, I found that a pretty interesting concept. So tell me a bit about settling into Canada.
So settling into Canada, I knew that it would take some time. I didn't know very many people in Toronto, where I live. I never even visited Toronto before I moved here. I had no idea what this place was like. Um, so I knew it would take some time. It took longer, I have to say. It was not
Always
it was
does.
not always does, right? And it was interesting. The kinds of things that bothered me were very interesting. So when we came in, one of the things that really bothered me was not having a credit history. And I didn't think that would bother me as much as it did, but it really did. And I think that's not because of a lack of, really not what it is, but what it represented. And that was that I came in as an international student. I was really young, and I understood and mastered a new system. I was very responsible. I paid off my cards, credit on, cards on time. I paid all my bills on time. I was responsible. And that number was kind of like a little medal, of my understanding and mastery of a foreign system. And that was taken away. And now I was starting from scratch, and I was being treated like, we don't know who you are. Like, we don't know if you're responsible. We don't know if we can trust you with more than a $5,000 credit card. And here you are in your 30s. Like, what do you mean you can't treat me with more than $5,000? So that really pinched. Uh, just all of the struggles with the bureaucracy here and there. So all of that was annoyances, frustrations with the system. Then there was finding your people, right? It always worried me that if something happened health wise, who do I reach out to? There's no one to really reach out to. So I really threw myself, both my partner and I really threw ourselves into finding our people. One way to do that for us has been organizing groups. So I am a knitter on the side. I really enjoy knitting. So I host a knitting group. My partner hosts various events, around Toronto. So we've met people like that. And gradually, it has taken time and consistency, but we've met, a bunch of people who we now consider our people to celebrate Diwali with. And these are not Indian people necessarily, but just people to celebrate our festivals with, birthdays with, events with. When we bought a new house, um, our first house, to celebrate that with. So just having people who you can reach out to, in moments that you need people around you. So that has made a huge difference. And finding work that feels meaningful and enjoyable, that has been a big part of it. I'm still with the company that I first joined when I moved here. It's a medical device startup. That's my day job. I work in medical devices. All of that together, there's so many pieces to this, right? It's like so many pieces
Yeah.
come together to build up belonging. I think the
Yeah.
one thing that I would say to anybody who moves to a new country is, don't keep looking for that old life, because if you wanted that, you could have just stayed back, right? You had it all, in that way. Try to build that new belonging, new people, new experiences. Be open to that stuff, because that's just how life is here, and life in the West can be lonely. So putting that extra effort out there to find those people has been really rewarding, and that's what it takes to build a fulfilling life here, really.
Yeah.
Finding people like you on LinkedIn has been such a gift.
Are you
Writing on
serious?
LinkedIn Yeah, writing on LinkedIn has been terrifying and very rewarding at the same time. Yeah, I've met a number of lovely people on there.
Yeah, LinkedIn can be a beautiful tool if you use it right.
Yes.
I like that point you make about, like, for like saying to yourself you're about to build a new life, because I remember I said something to it was my episode with Matthew Adolfo, who wrote the Canadian Workplace Culture book. And I said to him that one thing I've seen people struggle with is we come here and say, you're not allowing me to be my whole self. I'm like, once you say that, it's flawed because your whole self became incomplete the day you landed in Canada or whatever country you went to. Your new whole self is a mix of who you were before and who you are today.
Yes.
If you keep holding on to the old whole self, you will always feel like you can't fit in, because literally what you refuse to do is accept that there's a new you out there who's trying to settle in. New cultures, new nuances, new meals, new stuff.
Yes.
And so that whole self argument sometimes, like, I'm like, step back and think about it a bit. It's whole self, yes, but you have to do the work. Like, you have to do the work of building the new whole self. Nobody's saying kick away who you were before. No one is saying that. Like, it's more like, this is who you were before. This is where you are now. How do you bring that together to create a new dossier or new Sindhu, like a new whoever? Because then that is when you integrate better. You bring unique value to the society, because you bring something they don't have. You take what they have, mix it together. It brings something that doesn't exist. I'm like,
absolutely. Absolutely. There will always be parts. And I feel like there are, within a person, there's who you are, and there's who you are alongside the society you're in.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So, for example, I found that the way I used to be able to celebrate festivals, like very niche festivals, right? Like there's Pongal and there's South Indian festivals, right? I just don't have the community to support that. If other people are not celebrating that, how are you going to do it alone? It's just not possible. So there's a part of you that really exists only if there's a community to support that.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So, for example, the Jewish example, right? Like people celebrate, or it's not a celebration, but they observe a Sabbath, right? So, if everybody is not observing Sabbath with you, they're sending you text messages, they're calling you. How are you going to celebrate Sabbath? Or if you are attending a church where you don't really know anybody, you're not going to want to do that. So there's a part of you that has to be supported by community. And if you don't have that, you're not going to be able to hold on to that. So you have to build that part of you that is supported by this community. Maybe that means celebrating Christmas. Maybe that means attending events outdoors, right? Maybe that means taking up a new hobby. Maybe that means taking up reading or understanding the culture here or understanding indigenous cultures here, whatever that means. But you have to build out that separate part of you that is supported by Canadian culture or Canadian society, right? If you don't do that, you will always feel disjointed. And because of that, you'll feel a little bit disenchanted with Canada, that, oh, I don't fit in here. I don't belong here. I'm not accepted by this culture. Before you make an indictment of society, you have to ask yourself, have you accepted them?
Yeah.
It's a handshake. If you don't put your hand out,
it's a two-way street.
If you don't put your hand out, you can't really blame somebody for not putting their hand out either.
Yeah.
It's a two-way street. It's definitely a two-way street. And I really do have to say, I feel, at least living in the GTA, I haven't lived anywhere else, but living in the greater Toronto area, I think people are very welcoming.
That's beautiful to hear. Never lived there. Ottawa, visited Toronto. I'm like, I can't. So I lived in Lagos in Nigeria. Big city, noisy, traffic, everything. I'm like, I'm not sure I can do Toronto again. Like, I'm done with the city life for a bit. I love Calgary. Big city, small city vibes. Chef's kiss for me.
Perfect. You found your place.
I found my place, honestly. Like, I absolutely love Calgary, kind of, we're rounding up right now, but I want to talk. You write a lot about, and I feel like it's an important part of this conversation. You write a lot about, immigration policy changes, the news, and it feels like example, last year, I really like what you call it open. It felt like an open mic session. Last year was
was chaos.
It was chaos. And I keep seeing things like where people talk about stuff that was announced and didn't happen or stuff, and then there's all the analysis from people who understand it or people who don't understand it. And I think for me is like, do you have any way of learning to separate the grain from the chaff? Like, it's like, how do you, because there's just so much. And like, how do you deal with that? Like, how do you say to yourself, this is what listening to, this is not what listening to? Because as an immigrant, you're already dealing with a ton of things, and adding that noise to your head is problematic.
Oh, 100%. I think most of an immigrant's problem right now is reducing cognitive overload. That's
Mm.
number one right now for any immigrant navigating Canadian immigration specifically. The one thing I would say is wait for a day and look up on LinkedIn, follow 2 or 3 immigration professionals and reputable writers on immigration, and see what they say and follow their synopsis on whatever is the topic of the day, and really only follow what's relevant to you. You don't need to know what's going to happen with the caregiver program. You know what? Once you get your PR or citizenship and you become terribly passionate about immigration, then you can follow all that. Right? Till you are done, follow what's relevant to you. Don't lose your mind over it. Right? You have enough you have enough to worry about, my friend. So, till then, follow what's relevant to you. Then, by all means, gain interest in other topics. So, I would say there's a few people, I can drop a few names here. By the way, the open mic term was coined not by me. I don't take any credit for it. That was coined by this guy called Madhur Parashar. He is fantastic. Highly recommend following his YouTube channel and by the same name, and him on LinkedIn. There's also Matthew McDonald.
Yeah.
He's also on LinkedIn. There's Josh Shacknow on LinkedIn. These are all people on LinkedIn. I don't do any other social media. Life is too short. Uh, then there is so many others. There's Veronica. I'm blanking on the correct pronunciation of her last name, but I can drop it in the show notes for you,
Okay,
Roz.
sure. All right, sure.
So these are all people that give really nice summaries of what's going on, and in a way that the general public can understand. There's also Kuber of Ask Kuber. He gives really good summaries. If you follow that, that should be enough amount of detail for you. Ask Kuber also has a YouTube channel in which
Okay.
he goes into a little bit more detail. Follow what's relevant to you, forget about the rest, and manage your cognitive overload that way. It's really important to stay current, because if something changes and you don't follow it, you might
Yeah.
land up in trouble. And very important, please get legal support. Now is not the time for DIY, because
Yeah.
Canada, at least over the next 2 years, is trying to limit immigration, and they're using basically any excuse in the book to uh, reject applications, and you don't want a small mistake to cause a rejection for you. One last thing, people misunderstand that immigration can sometimes be a conversation. It's not. You just get a rejection, and that's basically it. There's no back and forth often. It's a rejection, and that's it. So definitely get legal help, especially right now in this stage where there's a lot of flux in the policies.
Yeah, like Blaine Kumarov improved always says
Yeah.
he's always like, immigration doesn't care about you, you need to care about immigration. Like, it doesn't, like you say, it's a machine, like it's just a machine. And so if you
Yeah.
need to care about it, and in a way that matters to you, and say, oh, it cares about me. It doesn't care.
Yeah.
I think my last question for you, and you've kind of talked a bit about it, the way I think when you talk about getting legal support. And so if for someone who's in Canada, who's coming to Canada, who's thinking of moving to Canada as an international student, PR, whatever, like, how do you think we should approach Canadian immigration in 2025? Like, how should I approach it?
How should they approach it, right?
Yeah, how should I approach it? Sorry, yeah.
I think it would be a good idea now for them to already be thinking about PR and their chances for PR before investing too much in the system, if that is their goal. Most people coming to Canada, especially from the developing world, their goal is to, at least work medium to long term, maybe even settle in Canada. So I don't see the point of investing in education only to realize later that you have no chance of, being
Yeah.
able to make it in PR. So having a consultation on the programs and determining what your chances are of PR at this stage makes sense, at least to me. So that's what I would suggest, that you look at it right now. That is only because the era of you being a professional with some years of work experience, or you being educated in Canada and having a few years of work experience and therefore easily getting PR, are way behind us. So, at this stage of being young, you have the luxury of being able to pivot to a direction where PR might be more easily facilitated for you. But once you're a professional, you have a few years of work experience under your belt, pivoting is much harder, right? So that is the time to get that information, not after you finished your masters or after you finished your bachelor's and had a few years of work experience. Then you're like, oh, now what, right? So that's where I would go.
Yeah, and that's really good advice. Like I feel like that's foundational advice, because you know, like people will say you get education, get some work, get PR. Like you say, that those things,
No,
it doesn't
they have to go they
exactly
have
work.
to go on parallel tracks. I think that's the one thing I would say. Your Whatever it is you're doing, studying, working, whether you come on a study permit or work permit, and PR have to, or immigration have to go on parallel tracks. People have this idea that I'll study and then worry about immigration, or I'll work and then worry about immigration. That does not work at all. I made that mistake as well, where it was like, okay, studying and getting good grades, or a teaching assistantship, or whatever is my first priority, or then getting a job. But understanding immigration and what it needs has to go, side by side, because
Mhm.
ultimately, if you're trying to stay long term, the way to do that is through immigration, not through
Yeah.
your grades. Your grades are not going to ensure that you stay here. Immigration is going to ensure that you're able to stay here, right? Nobody's going to say, oh my god, she has like a 4.0 GPA, let's give her a green card, right? That's not how this works at all. So keep that in mind. Yeah.
Oh gosh, that is so funny. Like, yeah, because it's I don't gosh, like it's work. Like it's you, and I think for me the biggest lesson there is we're done with the era of you just showing up and winging your way through it. You
Yeah.
have to be deliberate. Like you have to be deliberate about how you approach your immigration plan, what you want to do. This you have to be.
Absolutely.
You have to be.
Another thing I want to add is that there are people who got PR when Canadian PR was relatively easy to get. And now I find that they think that they can just go to the US and get a green card as well. It must be relatively straightforward. You are wrong. Immigration in the US does not work that way. It is really quite difficult to get a green card through skill based immigration in the US. And guess what? It's quite difficult to get PR in Canada now, too. So just because you had an easier or relatively straightforward path in Canada doesn't mean that you'll have a straightforward path in the US. So please educate yourself before you make immigration decisions, because you might find that you're quite surprised by that system. So I've seen people make that mistake where they extrapolate their previous experience into like a potential path in the US. So yeah, definitely educate yourself about that experience before jump headlong into that.
And you know what the meta point you raise here actually is that it worked for you doesn't mean it'll work for him or her.
Yes.
People do that a
Yes.
lot where they just take advice and this is what I did. I'm like, take it easy, take it easy.
Yes.
You're gonna put someone in trouble, which kind of also goes back to your point about seek legal advice, please. Like just talk to someone whose job from Monday to Friday and hopefully Saturday and Sunday is they're thinking about the immigrants, like not someone who they applied for PR 10 years ago and like, oh yeah, just I did this and I did that. No, the
Yeah.
system has changed
I,
so much.
I keep joking that the thing that your uncle did like 5 years back or your cousin did 5 years back is completely irrelevant. Like, don't talk to him. I mean, talk to them about other things, not immigration.
Yeah.
Talk to somebody really current, preferably somebody in Canada, preferably somebody who is working through immigration right now. In the US, it's okay to talk to somebody maybe within the past year or so, but immigration is something that keeps changing, especially
Yeah.
with who is the president, who is the leader, what is the politics. Politics is very closely tied with immigration, so there's that thing as well. Canada is going through an election this year, will very likely have an impact on immigration. So keep an eye on what's going on in the country. Be aware. There's that part as well. There's just a lot of pieces to it. It is complex. It takes work, but it is worth it. Keeping an eye on those things really matters. Yeah, it's a bit of adulting. Not gonna lie, it's a bit of adulting.
Thank you so much. This has been a beautiful one for me. Thank you.
Likewise, it was so fun talking to you, Doz. I'm very glad we connected, and this has been a fun conversation.
Thank you. Oh, this was good. Yeah, this was good. And I hope you enjoyed as much as I enjoyed this conversation. As always, please like, share, subscribe, follow us, share with someone. If you know someone we should talk to, send them our way. If you know someone that should listen to this, say to them, yes, you should listen to this right now. If you're coming to Canada in 2025. But enjoy. And thank you so much. Have a beautiful day.